With me is Brigadier Sharma. See, I'm sure that across the career you had in the Army. Give us some stories about how did that shape you as an individual?
That's right. It is only teamwork, like they say, one for all and all for one. In fact, the comradeship is absolutely a matter of life and death. And you have seen any number of movies with Hollywood, get that man out, even if he's lying there, whether he's wounded or lifeless, people can put their own lives to stake and get that person out. The person who's going into the battlefield, he knows that his comrades are there to look out for him.
Welcome back, guys, to another session at Echo Talks. Today's session is going to be very, very insightful. And the reason I say this because we keep on hearing a lot about on-field battles and combat missions, how different units of the infantry, army, navy, they function and their heroic story. But we actually miss on one of the core important elements of that operation, which play a very pivotal role. And that is called Corps of Engineers. Today, I'm very much delighted to introduce such an individual who has served a good period of his life in that section. With me is Brigadier Sharma, and I hand over to you. Welcome to Echo Talks.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving us time.
Thank you.
So, before we jump in, let's give a little brief of what I know about you to our audience as well, right?
Sure.
So, you passed and succeeded in IIT Kharagpur.
All right.
Then you took a chance to go back and join the army.
Sure.
So, what was that, your career choice versus, your passion for joining the army?
Right. It's a rare phenomenon that, an IITian, it's almost unthinkable that after spending about 5.5 years at one of the most premier institutions of the country, chooses to opt for an army career, or shall I say, armed forces career.
Correct.
But there are a couple of us who are, that passion in the mind that when we finished our courses, the options were there open, as it is now, that you just walk into any one of these countries, USA mainly, UK, or anywhere else, either for higher studies or for working abroad. But then there was a certain amount of passion, and I won't say serving the nation, but that one jazba was there that let us try something which is a little unusual, and that challenge kind of tickled the mind somewhere. And when the option came in, one said yes, and one went through the entire process of selection, and I found myself landed in exactly an opposite situation from an IIT to IMA. You keep hearing IIT to IIM, but there are some guys who's IIT to IMA, Indian Military Academy, Dehradun. Yes. So that is how the jump took place, and we were there about a year's course, and then life went on thereafter.
Great.
Yeah.
I think just for the benefit of our audience.
Sure.
I'm usually at there are paramilitary force, paratroopers,
right.
Battalions, Maratha regiments,
right.
different. But I think Corps of Engineering.
Yes.
Just throw us a little bit, light about what Corps of Engineering.
Sure.
Because of knowledge I had is when we launched it.
Yeah.
The last existence of the first existence we had is in 1780s.
Oh yeah,
right?
That's right.
So just walk us through the.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Most of us know that the fighting gets done by what are called the fighting arms.
Yeah.
Infantry is the queen of the battle, and rightly so. It's right there up front. To support them are the tanks, depending on which kind of a terrain. If it's a normal plains terrain to Punjab, and today we see them in Ladakh, in that area. So that is the tanks, the armored corps, which is the predecessor was the cavalry. It was the horse battles, then came the tanks, and today they got the armored corps. And the third, and equally important, is the artillery, which we call the gunners.
Yes.
So they give you the firepower, solid firepower, from right behind, and absolute accuracy down to the enemy. Now, to support this, there are the supporting arms. So, Corps of Engineers is one of the supporting arms. It's the Corps of Engineers and the Corps of Signals. They are absolutely upfront, and they support in various means. We can, discuss it a little later.
Yeah.
That these two are the supporting arms, and then are called the supporting services, which you call the EME, that's electrical mechanical engineer, the ordnance, the ASC, the medical, very important,
Very much.
and so on and so forth. The education core for that matter. So this is very broad structure, but everything comes together when it comes to the fighting formations.
As one big.
Like, starting from even a brigade level, you have certain elements of all these forces, but really it comes into play at the division level and beyond. That is the division, the corps, and the army. Army as in army command.
Army command.
And today we are talking about theaterization, which further adds onto the envelope the Navy as well as the Air Force, depending on the theater of the operations, where it should all come together as one solid fighting punch. That is Army, Navy, Air Force, where all the ingredients that support the any operation.
That's amazing.
So that's how it is. Yeah.
I'm a very dear friend of mine who's actually into the army.
Right.
And then he keeps reminding कि यार मैं पढ़ लिया होता अगर engineering में तो मुझे इतना नहीं पढ़ना. So I think most of us civilians have this notion कि एक बार आप army में चले जाओ तो it's all about going on the field or in the front.
Absolutely.
But I've seen it through close eyes that there's so much of specialization, so much goes in learning and educating that this friend of mine, he's been studying rigorously for the past 9 months and not met his family.
Sure.
So just bring us to, tell us more about, how does the education role plays in the bigger picture in the military.
Right. No, things are much different than what it used to be before. Even a very basic level of education was enough. And then the army trained you in the basic aspects of warfare, and you were done. Like you mentioned, that specialization, like in every other field, in fact, more so in the armed forces. Today, you can't fight a war without, it's a given that unless there is a technology backing, the wars cannot be fought by merely the brawn part of it.
Thank you for giving that insight. But what kind of specialization does Army require or is providing?
Right. Like I mentioned, it is a technological warfare. The envelope is complete. It is a 3D operation. And today with AI coming in, now you've seen how the battles of the recent times, how they have panned out.
Yeah.
Till a few years ago, nobody could even think that drones could be a lethal weapon. Today you see Ukraine, how they are fighting it out. It's all about now missiles, all fully controlled from their bases, which can do absolute precision targeting, precision bombing, precision rocketry, which can turn the tables completely. So it's all about the technology, which has to play the major role. AI is not too far away. And the other aspects in terms of what we were talking about, the supporting arms, like the core of signals you mentioned.
Yeah.
So there again, unless and until there is the cyber warfare, which becomes a very major, component. So now, once there is cyber warfare, there is countermeasure to cyber warfare. Now there are countermeasures to countermeasures. So it goes on and on. Right. So it's one step ahead you have to remain. The other aspect is the continuous learning.
Correct.
You mentioned specialization. I think you entirely also meant that, the friend that you talked about, that he's, there is never ending talk about studies and more studies. Well, like again, in fact, more so in the army, one has an idea that, that there is not so much to learn. But then as you go along, in ranks, and you get to know that there is more to learn. And obviously, you can't allow the grass to grow under your feet. So there are courses, there are examinations, right from the very basics up to, foreign courses, as many. We have a lot of, countries where we have a cross flow. We go to US, the US soldiers come here, and this is in fact getting more and more. So to learn about the warfare, some people say the generals mostly are fighting the previous war in their minds. So you are learning from the previous war and then preparing and planning for the next, exactly like you. But that's the wrong concept. It has to be, you have to learn from your own experience, plus add on to that as to what is happening around the world of technology, world of arms and ammunition, and then go ahead and how to plan. In fact, even within the last few decades, the change is so stark that somebody who would be reborn, he may not be able to recognize as to how different the battlefield of today has become.
Massive use of technology.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
See, I'm sure that across the career you had
Right.
in the army, you must have managed to pick up battalions, and then as you grow the rank, you
Yes.
keep on the spirit of comrade and the brotherhood also increases.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Plus, you also keep on learning a lot about how you have
Right.
to beat it. So, give us some stories about how did that shape you as an individual?
Oh yeah.
What kind of leadership?
That's right. That's right. It is only teamwork, like they say, one for all and all for one. So, in fact, the comradeship is absolutely a matter of life and death in the army. And you have seen any number of movies, whether Hollywood, get that man out, even if he's lying there, whether he's wounded or lifeless, people can, put their own lives to stake and get that person out. So, the person who's going into the battlefield, he knows that his comrades are there to look out for him. And that kind of a feeling cannot come in a day. It's nurtured, very carefully nurtured over the years, right from the start when you were in a training school as a soldier or a training center rather, or in various, schools of, training for the officers. So this happens all the time. Comradeship is built in so many ways. And as they say, the best place to create that feeling of oneness, a team feeling, is the sports. In sports, particularly the army encourages team sports, not so much individual. Of course, individuals are encouraged as much, but the primary requirement is to play team sport so that you encourage that kind of thing. And that there's a buddy system. I am there for you, you are there for me. But it enlarges from platoon sections to platoon to battalion, and you are doing it for the izzat of your friends and for the izzat of your battalion. When you put your life at stake, it is for that. And more often than not, it is for that. And you're not as if you're doing it for yourself. So basically, teamwork, team spirit, which comes, like you mentioned, with camaraderie and
nurtured over the years.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of when you talk about career options, of course, I think when we were growing up, we had I would say limited, but the exposure was less to the opportunities. Now, young generations have immense exposure to different opportunities to pick up. For someone who looks up, let's say a first generation guy who's aspiring to go into the army, and maybe he's very good at dancing. What kind of career options and what kind of a pathway has the army does have for him?
That's right. Firstly, it's army. One doesn't join the army as a career. It's not a career. It is a life. It's a lifestyle. In fact, I would say that I joined it for the lifestyle. We were there in the 60s. I happened to be a student and a resident of Dehradun. And I had seen it firsthand at the young age, at about 4 or 5, and seeing those bright young men playing, riding, and all that must have worked somewhere. That to make such a long detour to come from IIT back to the to the army. So it works on that basis. So it's not really a career. If you want a career, there are any number. You are right, absolutely. And with every passing day, more and more careers are opening up. But it's a choosing a life of your own, which is almost like a complete 360 degrees. There is, like you mentioned, comradeship. I mentioned, very good living conditions. Stresses, yes, absolutely different kind of stresses. But there are equal number of ways and means how to de-stress yourself. All that happens while in the army. So career-wise, I would say that, if your heart is in it, go in for it, and a whole wonderful life of adventure and, a challenge is awaiting any young man or woman today, for that matter.
I see. I think in today's time, we keep on saying there are a lot of nature is also not happy with us. There are a lot of natural calamity which keep on happening, and we keep on exploiting the means and everything to build more fancier things. Sadly, but on the other side of it, you always see that during such crises, the forces are the biggest
Yeah.
pillar support,
Yeah.
made the air and everything.
Right.
But I want to talk about more specifically your division,
Okay.
the core of engineering.
Right.
Walk us through some tales where core of engineers have actually contributed heavily
Oh, yeah.
in humanitarian.
Right. In fact, from the earliest times, we have a legacy of the British Indian Army. From there only we have come in.
Yeah.
In fact, if you take your mind around, most people won't know, but some of the best edifices in the country have been built by the Corps of Engineers.
Achha.
Whether it is, the station, I think it's called the Shivaji, Chhatrapati Shivaji, or a VT, one of these two has been designed, built right here. And today they are, places of their own. Any number of these institutions, the Gang Canal, the one which is from Roorkee, it is going down, it is done by the Corps of Engineers. And that is how Roorkee University, that time called the Thomason College, that came into play. Because again, and it was officered and manned by the Corps of Engineers, right from those days. That they had the wherewithal.
Which year?
This is in the, I won't remember exact date, but anything from 150 years earlier. Well, the first of the irrigation systems in India have been the contribution from the Corps of Engineers.
You see,
and they were young people. They were just captains and majors and lieutenants who would do any amount of, intuitively creative work and produce such edifices that you see all around you. In fact, scratch the surface and any old building, other than which is this thing, whether they were colleges or hospitals, they were all built by the Corps of Engineers. And I think it's an area of research that somebody should sit down and find out. The colonial house, for that matter, which became the bungalow, which is unique to an Indian climate, again was thought out by the engineers. They were architects at that time as well.
So tell me, we talk about, and I think I've seen close enough from my eye. These are all administrative. In every city, you see deputy commissioner residence, and they say British time. So during that time, did the Corps of Engineers also?
Yeah, very much. In fact, all the cantonments which are laid out, and they are pride of most of the mother cities that they are, attached to or are close by, are all products of this thing. In fact, I learned my post-graduation I did from SPA in urban planning only to help out in cantonments. And I had the opportunity to help and support the Bathinda cantonment, which is today one of the best. In fact, they say that if you are flying over it by helicopter or by any other means, the only patch of green that you see in the otherwise brown is the cantonment. That's how.
But I think that's also you mentioned, right? One thing which I've noticed, any cantonment across India, you'll always find lush, heavy, dense green.
Yeah, true, very true. Because I think they love the outdoors. For one, they love cleanliness, they love openness, and thanks to the British again, who set a certain amount of standards that it will be, per person it will be so many acres. If you fall to today's standard, per person should be 100 people. I mean, in an acre or more. But there it was, just ones and twos. Every house was almost an acre. They found the country so huge that the small island that they came from, the luxury of land just wasn't there. So here they went overboard and they just went and created these townships, which became enclaves of, healthy living.
Correct.
And of course, one can on the other side say that it created some kind of exclusive zones in popularly called the civil lines, where the bureaucracy stayed, the SP or the collector, all that, and the armed forces, and they had clubs which is the downside of it, which is another story. Obviously, it has to change. Today's country will obviously have a completely inclusive. But then the standard that they laid out, and by and large, there were no outside agencies working for it. It is self-help, even as late as Chandigarh. The Chandigarh cantonment, again very green, has been done only by troop labor. They have just planted almost every afternoon when otherwise, they deserve an hour or two of rest. They would go out and plant hundreds and hundreds of trees. And today, after 40 years, it's absolutely grown to full bloom and will compare with New Delhi or any other such place,
Yeah, I
which is
mean-
the planned one.
Anyway you go out, even abroad,
Yeah.
the first thing is talked about. Chandigarh हमेशा
Yeah.
जिक्र में आता है.
Yes, yes.
वो
absolutely.
इसलिए आता है because हमें I think beautifully planned है.
Sure.
And I think the beauty of the city is only because कि वो अभी भी untouched है,
Right, right.
unharmed,
Yes.
to an extent.
Absolutely. So there, the cantonment laws, there was a lot of civil population, but it was in a controlled manner. And obviously there was no greed of land being, a something where you can make money out of. But now the pressures from all around the cantonment is so much that the civil setup, or more than that, the real estate, they begin to have eyes, particularly I can say for Pune cantonment and all that, where these pressures time to time, come up so much that there is almost succumbing to the thing. But I think it is still being kept intact,
I hope so.
and the environment which a cantonment creates has been by and large. And more importantly, we have internally enough space to keep growing over
Yeah.
the years. I mean, left in 75 years ago, still there is enough land in most of these
If
cantonments
used
to grow.
wisely.
But that's a good foresight to be able to. But this is not all. This is just one part of the Corps of Engineers. About the combat side, if I may, the real work is not this. The real work is combat support to, as I said,
Correct.
the infantry, the armor, to be able to fight the warfare. And as the saying goes, it is providing mobility to your forces, or
it's
denying
only
mobility.
denying mobility.
I can deny mobility by putting mines in front.
Correct.
So of the enemy advance.
So that's what I said. I
Yeah.
introduced also, मेरे को लगता है कि क्या होता है कभी कभी कोई डिविजन ऐसी होती है जिसे less spoken.
Yeah.
So I mean this is it.
This is it.
We also mentioned about stress, and I think it's a now widely common topic, and we are actually very promoting. I mean, we are very supportive this way that we want to talk about this topic across different boards and everywhere. Tell me, how does in army, right? Because now also we keep on hearing stories of some soldier sadly had to gun him down, or between the soldiers. Such stories also keep on coming.
Yeah.
How does army support such initiatives in terms of mental well-being?
Sure.
And how do you manage and
Right.
combat that?
No, absolutely. This is one of the most important subjects for this thing. Today we talk about burnout in the corporate sector.
Yeah.
We never heard of burnout, so we don't burn out. That is, we rather live, survive, and do more
Yeah.
rather than get bogged down by the burnout. I don't know. I think Americans have given us this concept, and we are very happily following that also. But that apart, I would put the finger on the training and the discipline. I think these two would contribute greatly toward the relieving of stress. The stress will be there. I mean,
In any way.
far more difficult situations with the armed forces, particularly in the combat role. Can you imagine the stress of a soldier, of a Jawan, or the officers getting into battle? What can be more stressful than that? But to be able to circumvent that, the training right from day one conditions you in a manner that you accept that stress, de-stress, and get the task done. It is a mission-oriented activity in which stress has no place in it at all. If you are trained and conditioned from the first day itself that how do I deal with it, and then obviously it would come. For that they'll put you in training. Obviously, the old dictum goes: the more we sweat during peace, the less we bleed in war. It's an absolute a truth or a given, and which means basically that you have to train. There's nothing else to do but to train yourself for the next war. And despite the fact that there's almost everywhere in all corners of our borders that some activities on. So this is not as if the entire army is free to do the training, but it is active borders on the west, on the north, on the east,
And I think
everywhere.
how across the world tracking on
Right.
how India is placed right now.
Yeah.
Geopolitically wise
Sure.
as well. I feel that there are a lot of eyes.
Right.
We're in the southeastern part of the world, right?
Yes.
And what covers around us is
Right.
also doesn't create tension, but we have to be alert
Yes.
to the neighbors,
Correct.
with external forces,
No doubt.
and seeing how
Mm.
wars between different countries are also impacting.
Yes.
Because I think one big element which has come to light is that economy also get impacted, and for the civilian life, let's say for the civilian life,
Sure.
people are getting more educated about that. How does any war in any part of the world creates an impact, big impact in your water or any kind of basic amenity.
Right.
So you mentioned, right, that how we mitigate it, how we ensure that.
Right.
I think one of my last questions, which I kept it purposely in the last was, I've always seen with close eyes people, the family members, that once you retire from the army or from the services, the first question my uncles have always been asked is, "Acha, kal se kya karoge?" I mean, their response has always been, "Job tak karte hai." And always, when I was growing up, I used to think, does that mean that he was working and now people are saying that you should not work? So, in that post-service transition, just throw some light, how is that difficult? How do you guys adjust?
Firstly, I think it's now commonly understood that one has to prepare for it. It doesn't come, you cannot switch the role overnight. So, in the last phase of your career, one must consider that many of the, which you take for granted around you are not going to be there. Things come with your position, perks in the sense that the facilities that are provided for you to work better, it may not be available. So you have to very consciously decide, both financially as well as socially, whether you're going to, come back to the civil life. You've always been in that, your friends, relatives are from that sector. So it's not some alien world that you're going to be thrown in, but the fact that you plan for it, you are aware of it to begin with, that this is inevitable, the change will come today or tomorrow, and that I planned for it. So if you invest a certain amount of your time and energy and finance into that, I think the changeover becomes smoother. B is the mindset that you must attitudinally also change, that you could have been in a commanding position. And this goes as well for our Jawans, JCOs, other end, that they are attuned to a sheltered kind of life. It needs to be sheltered because then only he can give his best. But if he is beset with 100 problems, then this thing. But now he has to face those problem himself. So again, the preparation is equally valid, whether at any level of the armed forces, in any of the Army, Navy, Air Force. It's the same thing. That is one. B, what I would feel that the Army gives you sufficient training in a personality development in terms of loyalty. I think in the armed forces, one of the first requirements is loyalty. Second is sincerity. Certain amount of, a purpose of,
no breathing.
Yeah. And if you think in the corporate, who would not like a person who dedicatedly, without any supervision, is totally sincere, he is time managed on his own,
structured.
He is self-started, he is structured, he has leadership qualities, and he has ability to adapt and learn. That flexibility he learned there, but he uses it over here. And if you have the right attitude, I think it takes little time, very little time, to change over and in fact be an asset. I would imagine with the number of people today we have, you are aware, 25 lakh almost people who are retired and who are pensions, and it's actually a burden, but not burden in the sense it is a return from the nation, a grateful nation that they. But this resource must be utilized. It has been utilized at a number of places, but not in the manner. Many years ago, I think maybe 30, 40 years ago, they had these TA battalions for environment. Yes, and I have seen an entire battalion reforesting the hills of Missouri. I was in Dehradun, like I mentioned, and you could see within a couple of years that, like hair grow back on a person. It was like that. I could see from a distance that green shoot every time I would come back on leave. the greenery was a little better. It had been actually removed completely, the deforestation, because of the limestone quarry, which Dehradun has, all the mountains. Yeah, it had been scraped out new,
Yeah, as I said.
and this had been restored. And this is just one example. You can, any number of examples, and today a disciplined force is required in almost all walks of life. And if you have this much of a resource and who's already getting some kind of a pension, you have to actually support it with some more. And you have a dedicated, I'm not talking about individuals, one off. Somebody can do well, somebody can relax.
Yeah, I mean, that's again an individual choice.
But at the resource level, it's a national resource which our planners have all the opportunity and the possibilities of utilizing this very, very capably.
Great. So with that, I think we end our session.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a lovely insight.
Right. It's been a pleasure for me.
What learning I take after every session, I keep talking about this. But with this session,
right,
there's so much to see about it when we talk about, just as I said in the beginning,
right,
we talk about the larger, I would say, in the fame or in the sight. I hope someone in the Bollywood can pick up a topic and talk about contribution in core.
Right. Oh, yeah, even that is possible. Why not?
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Been a pleasure.
Same.